Well, the next 48 hours could be very telling for what taxpayers here at home could be facing over in the Middle East, as the average price for a gallon of gas continues to be nearly $1 higher than it was this time last year. While the average is down from a week ago, it's still at $4.04 a gallon. Now, earlier this week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the UK Foreign Secretary. The State Department announced that the two discussed the importance of Europe taking on a greater role in its own security, and they reiterated their shared commitment to safe transit in the Strait of Hormuz and ensuring that Iran never develops or obtains a nuclear weapon. Now, news reports indicate continued conflict over the strait and the free flow of oil on the water and also in pipelines across land. Now, yesterday, President Donald Trump acknowledged the high energy prices here back at home heading into the fall in an election year, with that ongoing conflict with Iran still unsettled.
I inherited the highest prices ever. I inherited the worst inflation in the history of our country. And we have done an amazing job. And oil prices now are coming down very rapidly. If you look at what's going on, it's down to 75. When I started the very important excursion into the Islamic Republic of Iran, it was a very important excursion because they can't have a nuclear weapon. Otherwise, the whole world would get blown up. We're not going to let that happen. Not only us, not only the Middle East, the whole world would have been catastrophic. We had no choice. We had oil down to less than two, in many places like Iowa. Oil was down to, gasoline was down at numbers that people hadn't seen in years. $1.85, $1.95. So it passed Tuesday. I was in Iowa at a stop, and we had $1.95, another one, $1.85 a gallon. And we'll see those days pretty soon again, based on everything I see, as soon as the war ends. And I think it's going to end pretty soon. I don't think they can go much longer. Yeah.
Well, as we head into the weekend and what exactly to expect with the conflict in Iran and the impact on oil prices, let's talk with Matthew McManus. He is a Georgetown professor of energy diplomacy and a former State Department official, plus a visiting fellow of the National Center for Energy Analytics. Matt, thanks for taking time with us. A lot of uncertainty heading into the weekend, but what kind of things can you share with us to, I guess, ease some minds as to how the international system handles oil prices in this kind of environment?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Greg, and that's a great question. And I think, we can take a moment. Oil is trading now in New York at $76 a barrel, despite an ongoing conflict in the Middle East. And you have to wonder, how does that happen? And I think that the good news, if you could call it that, is the institutions of international energy governance are working. We have a bipartisan investment in a Strategic Petroleum Reserve that is now dispersing oil to the U.S. market, and our allies, as importantly, in IEA countries, which mainly Europe, Japan, South Korea, are doing the same. And somewhat, unexpectedly, you see China has huge reserves, 1.4 billion. Now, they're not as transparent as we are in the IEA, and of course, we would like them to be. But at the present moment, it's helpful that those reserves are there. And China has also cut back their importing of oil by some 40%. So in addition to that, you have the U.S. oil production at a record high, 13.6 million barrels per day. You have new production online, up 17% in Brazil, up 17% in Venezuela. And so markets are responding. And oil is getting to the market, and you can't beat the market. The price, again, is $76 a barrel. And I think that gives time for diplomacy. It gives time for military action if needed. And I think, I look down here, the street, I'm right outside Washington, gasoline is $3.90 a gallon. So we do have time. We do have these emergency reserves, and we do have surging production, mainly really led by the United States. So those are all, I think, going to give diplomacy the time, hopefully, to resolve the crisis.
Matt, now this was before my time, but the energy crunch in the 70s, how much have we evolved from that type of situation where you ended up having crazy long lines of people trying to just get gas so they can get to work, to where we are now, where we have a conflict in the Middle East, expecting it to increase the volatility of the price of oil, but also the availability of oil. Talk us through how we've evolved over the past 45, 50 years.
So I'm about old enough to remember odd even days, and we would drive to New Jersey from Pennsylvania to see my grandparents, where you couldn't fill up your car on a particular day. And so what really Washington did with Henry Kissinger, he created the International Energy Agency right at the State Department where I used to work. And that is a strategic stockpile of oil, again, not only in the US, but in our European and Asian allies. And it was at the ready. We've only used it about 5 times. We're using it massively now. It is a bipartisan investment in energy security. And also, the US is now the world's largest oil producer. So back then, when the price of oil increased, a lot of that money went to OPEC, and it left the U.S. Here, that oil is still, the money is still remaining in the U.S., and it's being invested in additional oil production. So I think it's a very different situation, and we have diversified our economy from oil in many ways, but we've also wisely invested in oil production and this huge energy security stockpile that we're using. It is getting to low levels, but it's there, and this is a significant disruption, is what it's for.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask, is just how long of this stockpile can we tap into?
We can go many more months. We have 304 million barrels left, and again, we've drawn down about 100 million of our 170 million barrel pledge, and China has a huge reserve as well. And one of the things we have exported to China is our oil dependency. Now they are the most oil import dependent country in the world. It's much more of a concern to them and to countries in the Asia Pacific, because we have become energy independent, although of course it's a global market and we're going to pay global prices.
Talk a little bit, if you can, about the geopolitics of China and Russia and global oil prices when it comes to the conflict in Iran. Is that something that people really need to be cognizant of?
I think they do, because in the case of Russia, you see increasing Ukrainian attacks on Russian refineries. You have multilateral sanctions on Russia for their invasion of Ukraine. And so Russia can only sell their oil under a prescribed formula. And in the case of China, you have this really unbelievable reduction of almost 40% of their oil demand. Now, many people believe they were building stockpiles into the crisis, and they've done that for many years. And now, of course, they've stopped that. And it would be helpful if they would be transparent, which they're not, about how much oil they're releasing onto the world market. But frankly, it's not unhelpful they have that stockpile. But if it could be integrated with the response of the West and they could be more transparent, it would be much better.
Conversely, it looks like we have some really strong allies in the Middle East. I'm talking about like Saudi Arabia and some of these other countries. What's the significance of that in the current status of the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, that's a really good question. So while the consumer countries invested in the IEA, Saudi Arabia and the UAE very wisely invested in redundant pipelines, right? You have the East-West pipeline to the Red Sea for Saudi Arabia, and you had the port of Fujairah in the Gulf of Oman for the UAE. That meant that even during the full shutdown of the strait, more than half of the oil was getting to world markets. That's very significant. And I think after the crisis is over, you're going to see a lot more investment in new pipelines and redundant ways to get oil out. Unfortunately for Qatar, they were unable to get their LNG out of the strait. And there are no similar, backdoor pipelines for LNG.
So what does that backup plan signal to Iran, for instance? Is it showing that Iran may not have all the cards when it comes to that shipping of the oil through the strait?
Absolutely. The countries will go even further to diversify, not to be dependent on one route. Saudis have already shown a huge ability to move their oil, both through the Med and through Bandar al-Madab, which, of course, now, as you know, is being threatened by the Houthis. So that is a problem. And Iraq has a pipeline to Kirkuk. So all of these countries are looking immediately to make these major investments in new pipelines for their energy security.
And what about the dynamic between the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere? Is there more of a focus on trying to make sure that maybe not as much reliance on the either hemisphere from wherever someone's
the good news is we're already there. The locus of energy production has shifted from the Persian Gulf to not only the United States, but Venezuela, over 1 million barrels per day now, in line with the United States, and Brazil, major oil producer, about 3.3 million barrels per day. Again, they're up 14 to 17%. You have Argentina making investments in their shale oil. So the center of global oil production is no longer in the Persian Gulf, it's in the Western Hemisphere. And that has helped shelter the U.S. from this global energy disruption in a way that is very, very different than friends, allies, and strategic competitors and perhaps adversaries in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, and Matt, just to wrap things up, it's been extremely enlightening for me, and I'm sure the audience as well, just to better understand the geopolitics and the different types of mechanisms that have been put in place over the decades to help absorb some of the potential demands that there are in a conflict like what's happening in the Middle East. Encapsulate that for us as we head into the weekend. What should consumers be? Should they just have a little bit of resting in their mind to maybe not come back with a sticker shock at the beginning of the week?
100%. $76 a barrel is about where prices were at the beginning of the conflict. We've seen that both government-led and private sector-led responses, including demand response, have all worked. There is time. There's a lot more oil in stocks, but when the Persian Gulf is closed, yes, you do run down your stocks, your commercial, your strategic. But when it is resolved, you will build them up again. So I believe that the American driver can take comfort in that there have been long-term investments by energy producers and energy consumers for a disruption, be it weather, be it a conflict in the Gulf, and it is working. Many people would have predicted, and they did, $200 a barrel oil in a situation like this. It didn't happen. It's not going to happen. I think we're going to be good for several more months, and I believe it will be resolved by then.
Matthew McManus, Georgetown professor of energy diplomacy and a former State Department official with 30 years plus of experience in the international energy sector, and also a visiting fellow for the National Center for Energy Analytics. Greatly appreciate you taking the time here with us here on The States.